What's good? It's Wu. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love hip hop like I do. I wanted to talk a little Wu-Tang Clan, but more specifically, I wanted to get into what I consider to be the prime era of the Wu-Tang. Like, people understand that the Wu-Tang has been around for like a long time, that they kicked off in the early 90s and that they still exist and release a lot of material till this day, especially with Ghostface Killah in particular being probably the most prolific solo Wu member over the years. I mean, when they first came out the gate, it was kind of thought that Method Man was going to be the biggest star, and you could argue that in certain ways he has kind of become that with his acting career and so forth. But in terms of like album by album solo discography, I think Ghostface Killah pretty much runs away with that. But I wanted to talk about how in the era of 1993, which would mark the release of Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, basically the breakthrough group Wu-Tang Clan album that featured the song Method Man, the song Cream, Can It All Be So Simple, Tears, Ain't Nothing With, Mystery of Chess Boxing, basically the classic Wu-Tang Clan group album, the debut group album of the Wu, which came after a couple early pre-Wu-Tang Clan releases from the GZA, the Genius. The album was called Words from the Genius. When he was signed to another label, they were basically trying to brand, him and RZA as like the new Big Daddy Kane and Rakim. But that didn't work out, so RZA basically masterminded the Wu-Tang Clan crew album with 9, some people will say 10 members. I caught a lot of flack on my top 5 Wu-Tang affiliate albums. A lot of people took issue with me considering Capadonna to be an affiliate and not an official Wu-Tang member. Another conversation for another day. But you go from 1993 all the way up to 1998, and I look at that 5-year period as being Wu-Tang Clan when they were at their absolute top, clicking on all cylinders basically. But what happened after that run that made the Wu-Tang Clan feel a little less essential, a little less cohesive, like it was a group that was operating as a single unit with a whole bunch of parts that could operate solo as well? Well, you look at the succession of solo albums that followed the Wu-Tang Clan 36 Chambers debut album. It went Method Man to Cal, that was 94. And then in 95, which I look to be the greatest year for the Wu-Tang Clan, period. 1995 had the Old Dirty Bastards return to the 36 Chambers, the dirty version, followed by Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links, which many believe to be the greatest Wu-Tang solo album of all time. And then the GZA's Liquid Swords, which many were arguing at the time, which was a greater solo album, Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links or GZA's Liquid Swords. For a long time, and even still in a way till this day, it's kind of debated which is the greatest Wu solo album, and it's usually between those two. Some might throw Ghostface Killah's Supreme Clientele from the year 2000 in that mix. Some might even throw Ghostface's debut, Iron Man, in that mix. But again, in 95, you had the Old DB's solo album, you had Raekwon's, and you had the GZA's. And then in 96, you had Ghostface's debut album, Iron Man. So what was happening at this time is you listen to any one of the Wu albums from, say, 95, or in the case of Ghostface 96 album, basically everything up to the second Wu-Tang album, which was a mega event. 1997, they followed up that 1993 album, Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, with 97's double album, Wu-Tang Forever. It was a huge thing that they were releasing this album. A lot of anticipation. They had like a Source magazine that just featured a Wu-Tang red W and had like a pull-out poster. I had that poster on my wall, by the way. But yeah, basically from 93 to that Wu-Tang double album, in between there, the solo releases, it felt like a family affair because you had so many features from other Wu members on each one of these solo albums. So like when Raekwon released Only Built for Cuban Links, that felt like a duo album with Raekwon and then Ghostface Killah featured on more than half of the songs. So as you're listening to these solo albums in 95, which I kind of skipped over Method Man's Tical, it did have a Grammy Award winning single, or at least a remix of the single. It had the song Bring the Pain, which was a great single. But Method Man has never really been heralded as having released great solo albums. I mean, there are people who like Tical, his 94 debut, and T2, Tical 2000 Judgment Day, which I believe was released in 2000. But Method Man is more seen as being a charismatic rapper who could basically steal a song or give a song the chorus, the hook that it needed to put it over the top into being a sensational single. Look at his contributions to Raekwon's Ice Cream from Only Built for Cuban Links, or his kicking off the first verse of the GZA's Shadowboxing from that Liquid Swords album. Method Man could steal a track like no other, but his albums for some reason didn't really amount to what you think his talent would lend itself to in a solo album. But again, all of these 95, I'm talking like the ODB, Raekwon, GZA, Ghostface in 96, these solo albums felt like family affairs. In fact, by the time Ghostface released Iron Man, Capadonna was featured so heavily, almost as heavily as Raekwon, where it almost felt like they were a three-man group for some time. For a couple years, it was a tandem. In fact, Ghostface featured Capadonna on the cover of his album. So you know how Raekwon in Only Built for Cuban Links has the album cover. This is basically Only Built for Cuban Links 2, where they revisited the theme, where you've got Raekwon basically posted, and then you got Ghostface on the eyes that's in back of you, kid. They actually say that on the intro to Only Built for Cuban Links. You had the feeling that this was this like brotherhood, and that one hand washes the other, one crew member looks after the other, and that it is basically a hip-hop family. So again, on Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links solo debut, Ghostface is on several songs, and then you've got other members popping up. You've got, Inspectah Deck coming in on Guillotines, kicking off the first verse, as he famously kicked off the first verse on 97 Wu-Tang Forever's Triumph single, their mega single, as well as kicking off the first verse on Ghostface Killah's Assassination Day, track 5 from Iron Man. That's another really good posse cut. In fact, it was such a family affair by the time Ghostface had his Iron Man debut in 96, that song Assassination Day, it has RZA on it, it has Master Killer on it, it has Raekwon on it, it has Inspectah Deck on it, it doesn't even have Ghostface on it. It's a Ghostface song on a Ghostface album, but it's got 4 other clan members spitting their verses, but nobody would even blink an eye because you're listening to a Wu-Tang solo album from around this time, and this was just kind of how they rolled sometimes. But look at the features list on Ghostface Iron Man. Same thing with GZA's Liquid Swords. You got the feeling that Raekwon and Ghostface rocked together very closely, but you also had a feeling that you had some Wu affiliates, Killah Priest in particular, and other people from the Sons of Man group that would feature on like Old Dirty's album, the Dirty version, Return to the 36 Chambers. But like on GZA's Liquid Swords, you've got Inspectah Deck on his Cold World single. You've got Old Dirty Bastard, Master Killer, and Inspectah Deck on Duel of the Iron Mike. Again, Method Man pops in with that iconic verse from Shadowboxing. You've got You God, Raekwon, and Ghostface on Investigative Reports. So what happened? Well, RZA puts it as he was basically at a point where he was asking for way too much money per beat produced. He basically was well fed. They lacked a lot of the hunger that they had in 93, 94, 95. Plus, by the time Ghostface released that Iron Man solo album in 96, other clan members who hadn't yet released a solo album, like look at You God, but look at Inspectah Deck, because he was seen to be as one of the most serious MCs from the Wu when they came out the gate. You would have thought that he would have been one of the first 3, 4, 5 members to drop a solo album, but no. Inspectah Deck didn't release his debut album, Uncontrolled Substance, until 1999, 6 years after that Wu-Tang group debut. So again, Ghostface dropped in 96, and you got other clan members that are looking at this like this is in a way Ghostface's second solo album. Even though it was his first, he was featured so much on Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links that it felt like, damn, you just had your solo outing on Ray's album, basically. So why are we skipping the line and giving Ghostface this Iron Man album before Inspectah Deck and other clan members get to have their solo debut? But on top of that, you had other group members that were truly coming out with their second album before Inspectah Deck even got his first off. So, you know how I said Method Man dropped that T2 Tikal 2000 Judgment Day second album several years after Tikal in 94? Well, I said that it was like in 2000. It was actually released towards the end of 98. Again, Uncontrolled Substance from Inspectah Deck didn't come until the next year. So you had Tikal 2000, basically Method Man's second album. Old Dirty Bastard released his second album, and within a month of Inspectah Deck releasing that Uncontrolled Substance album, within the same month, you had Raekwon already on his second full album, Immobilarity, which again, you could kind of look at this nearly as being Raekwon's third solo album because of how much he was featured on Ghostface Killah's Iron Man debut album. So Immobilarity dropped just a month after Inspectah Deck's debut. So that type of situation and solo album by solo album rollout left a bad taste in a lot of group members' mouths. And on top of that, you know how I said that RZA was basically charging a ton per beat to where his own crew members couldn't really afford his beats for several songs. So RZA basically produced the entire Enter the Wu-Tang album, but then he also produced Method Man's Tikal album, most of Old Dirty Bastard's Return to the 36 Chambers, the dirty version. I mean, there are two other very prominent Wu-Tang producers. There's a Fourth Disciple, or you could say there are three others. Fourth Disciple is the second most prolific out of the clan, and then True Master and Mathematics. Those were basically the four people who were producing most of the clan's beats. But RZA was producing like 90% of the Wu-Tang material, and he produced the entire Only Built for Cuban Links Raekwon solo debut album. Every single beat on that album is a RZA production. Same thing with Liquid Swords. The only song that Fourth Disciple produced was on the CD version, not the tape version, but the Bible song, which was actually a Killah Priest single that would later be featured on Killah Priest's Heavy Mental album in 98, which is what I picked as the greatest Wu-Tang affiliate album. But before that song Bible, the basic instructions before leaving Earth, was featured on that Killah Priest solo album. It was featured at the end, basically a bonus song on the GZA's Liquid Swords album. GZA doesn't even have a verse on the song. It's all Killah Priest, but that's the one song on Liquid Swords that's not produced by the RZA. So RZA was producing like all of the important Wu stuff on Ghostface Killah's Iron Man's album. The RZA produced every single beat except for one produced by True Master. True Master produced Fish. So when you get to 97, this is a year or two after what I consider to be the best Wu album, Wu year, 1995. Again, Ghostface then drops Iron Man in 96, and then the big Wu-Tang sophomore album, the double album Wu-Tang Forever, drops in 97, and it's mostly RZA beats again, but there was actually more contribution from Fourth Disciple and True Master on this album than in previous Wu-Tang or Wu-Tang solo group member efforts. Now, around the same time as Wu-Tang Forever, Killer Army, another Wu-Tang affiliate, dropped Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Very good album. I actually had that listed as number 2 best album out of the Wu-Tang affiliates. By the way, a lot of people said I should have had Law of the Darkman's Heist of the Century listed. You're right. That was a top 5 Wu-Tang affiliate album. My bad. I actually had like a Shaheem album. I had a Gravediggers album, other Wu-Tang affiliates above Heist of the Century, but you could very well argue Heist of the Century was one of the top 3, you could say, Wu-Tang affiliate albums. But Fourth Disciple was basically tasked with producing almost all of the beats of that Killer Army Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars album. And again, RZA handled the bulk of the production from Wu-Tang Forever. But after that, you look at like Cappadonna's The Pillage album. RZA produced a few beats, but that was mostly True Master and some Fourth Disciple and Mathematics. And then you look at when Inspectah Deck finally released a solo album after all the contributions he made. Again, he has blessed so many different Wu-Tang solo albums with iconic verses. When he finally released his Uncontrolled Substance solo album, RZA produced 2 songs on that entire album. Fourth Disciple produced a few, True Master produced a couple, Pete Rock produced one, I believe. Inspectah Deck actually produced a lot of those songs on his solo album himself. So that tells you that the clan wasn't as cohesive and together as they were from that 93 to 97 stretch. By the time you hit 98, yes, there are good solo Wu albums after that, like Inspectah Deck's Uncontrolled Substance wasn't a bad album. I mean, Ghostface Supreme Clientele was great, and RZA produced a few songs from that one, not the lion's share of the production, but almost half of the production on Ghostface 2000 album. RZA contributed, but like Raekwon's Mobilarity, hardly anything from the RZA. RZA only produced a couple songs from ODB's second album, Nigga Please. Method Man's sophomore album, Judgment Day, only has a few songs produced by the RZA. And it's like, if you listen to the RZA contributions from some of these albums, you see there's something kind of missing. It's weird. It doesn't have that vintage, dirty, raw, with the, kung fu and just those Eastern sounds in the beats where it sounds quintessentially RZA. I mean, he still produced several good beats in different spots, but it doesn't seem like it was as consistent where every single beat is just a bona fide banger. Like, there was something that was kind of lacking from RZA beats, I'd say from like 97 onward. Again, he does have a lot of high points still, but it wasn't the same thing that he had just rolling in 95, 94, and 96, 93, obviously, with that Wu-Tang group debut. But again, between the RZA beats, the RZA contributions to the solo album, the label and money issues in terms of, certain clan members feeling that they were left out, certain clan members feeling that they were kind of like more entitled than other group members. You just had a lot unraveling from what was such a family affair in this Wu-Tang experience from 93 to 97, where it just wasn't the same by the time you get, I felt like it was still kind of hanging on at 98 because there was still such good output. The Dirty Weaponry second album from Killer Army was solid. Again, Heavy Mental from Killer Priest was really good. Method Man had dropped that second album. Sons of Man also dropped around the same time Killer Priest. Killer Priest is also a member of Sons of Man, but they came out with the group album around the same time Killer Priest dropped Heavy Mental in 98. So there was still enough Wu-Tang activity where it looked like the party was still going, but the writing was on the walls to the point where when you get to 99, it just wasn't the same thing. I mean, when the Wu eventually released the W album and then Iron Flag, yes, they were Wu-Tang albums. Yes, they did have some good songs, but it didn't feel like it was still that family affair, and it damn sure didn't feel like it was a family affair for most of the Wu-Tang solo albums after 97. Even other high points like this Only Built for Cuban Links album, Only Built for Cuban Links 2 album from Raekwon. Very good album, and there was some RZA participation, but this was kind of an anomaly to where you did get some Wu-Tang contribution, but so many years had passed by the time this came out to where it was far removed from that vintage early to mid 90s prime Wu-Tang Clan era. But yeah, let me know what you think about that 93 to 98 era for the Wu-Tang. What are your favorite Wu-Tang solo albums? And do you kind of see it the same way to where they just were not clicking on all cylinders from like after, basically from the time they dropped like the Wu-Tang Forever double album and afterwards? Yes, 98 was still kind of popping with some of those albums I just mentioned, but would you agree that the party was kind of ending by that point? I mean, remember like when Motherless Child was featured on Ghostface Iron Man album, it had already been featured on like the Sunset Park soundtrack. You had, what was that song? Cross My Heart from Killer Priest Heavy Mental that was featured, I believe, on the Caught Up soundtrack. So you had great song placement from Wu-Tang members on several different soundtracks. Like, you look at the soundtracks from like 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, and there's usually a Wu-Tang member in a lot of these relevant soundtracks. They just were clicking, both from a group perspective and from a solo perspective, but it was also kind of a fun experience because you had the feeling that even if it was just one or two members on the track, you could almost picture the other dudes either in the studio, near the studio, or just close by to where it still felt like it was all in together. As Method Man put it on one of the songs from Wu-Tang Forever, where he says, all in together now, follow me the Mr. Meth Candy Man, farewell to the flesh. But yeah, that ride from 93 to 98 was like no other. And it was just a joy to have witnessed the album by album, song by song, beat by beat, verse by verse output from the clan around that time. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love hip hop like I do. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.